Hello and welcome to today's Wikigender webinar. Today we're going to be discussing the theme of gender stereotypes in the classroom and how to address these stereotypes, in particular to promote girls' education. So this webinar follows a week-long online discussion that has been taking place on Wikigender on this same topic. The discussion has been a good success so far, with over 50 comments from researchers, practitioners, and advocates all working in this field. And today we are very excited to welcome 4 of these contributors to today's Wikigender webinar. They're going to share with us some important new work that's being done in this area, including new research by the UNESCO team. And also we're going to talk about sort of some of the remaining challenges and barriers that are blocking progress in this area. So I'd like to invite each of today's participants to introduce themselves and offer a little bit of background about the organization that they come from and the work they're doing. So you'll have approximately 1 minute, so it's a quick introduction, but there'll be more time later on throughout the webinar to go further into your work. So Kate, if you want to start.
Hi, thanks. Yes, my name is Kate Redman. I work for the Global Education Monitoring Report. We're published by UNESCO. We're actually an independent report. We started in 2002, producing annual reports that monitor global progress towards education goals. So from 2002 until 2015, we were monitoring progress towards the Education for All goals. And our report that came out just at the end of last year was the first in a 15-year series that's going to monitor progress towards all of the education targets in the Sustainable Development Agenda. And today I'll be talking specifically about recent research that we've done looking at gender bias in learning materials.
Thank you. Leary, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us some about the Council of Europe?
Hi, yes, my name is Leary Kopacz Di Michele, and I'm the head of the Equality Division at the Council of Europe, which brings together 3 different entities. One of them is, of course, gender equality, then there is disability and discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation or gender. We'll also the area of gender equality. We have a strategy that guides the activities of the organization in this area. And one of the 5 objectives is, of course, combating gender stereotypes and sexism. So there is a lot of work that we have developed in this particular objective, including on combating gender stereotypes in and through education. So I will bring to the discussion some of the tools that we have prepared in this respect, some of the good practices, as well as the standards that the Council of Europe has in this area.
Great, and we also have Nora Files here with us. Want to introduce yourself?
Nora, thanks very much. Yeah, Nora Files is my name, and I manage the UN Girls Education Initiative, which is a global partnership in operation for the last 15 years, started even before the GEM report in 2000. And our objective is to promote good practice in girls' education and gender equality, to do policy advocacy, to ensure that policies and frameworks respond to the needs of girls, prioritize girls' education and lead to gender equality. And we build a collaboration and partnership, support collaboration partnership in a number of ways at the global and the regional and at the country level around girls' education and gender equality. In 2014, we launched an initiative that was the Good Practice Fund, a good practice fund for the documentation of what works for girls education and gender equality. And we learned a lot through that process of what processes and what approaches were effective in breaking down stereotypes and gender bias in the classroom. And I'll refer to some of those today. Thanks.
Thank you. And finally, Hendrina, if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Hendrina Doroba. I'm the Executive Director for Forum for African Women Education List. We are a Pan-African NGO that promotes women and girls' education across sub-Saharan Africa. We do this through our evidence-based demonstrative intervention, just to showcase what works in promoting girls' education. And then we do a lot of advocacy in terms of trying to integrate gender into national policies and practices, but also to raise awareness on the importance of promoting women and girls' education across sub-Saharan Africa. We've done quite a number of work around trying to address issues of stereotype, both in terms of the materials that is being used, but also within the learning environment. So I'm hopeful that during this discussion, I'll be sharing some of the experiences that we've had relating to helping building capacity of teachers, but also transforming the learning environments to make sure that girls are given the opportunity to learn in a fair and free atmosphere. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We'd like to invite Kate Redman from the UNESCO team, who's going to tell us a little about some of their recent research.
Thank you. I guess everyone who's listening today will agree that it's not easy to measure progress of gender equality in education. Our report, though, the GEM report, is mandated to do this because it's part of our new agenda, and we put quite a lot of work into it already. We just published a policy paper right at the end of last year. It's called Textbooks Pave the Way to Sustainable Development, because we feel that one way that we can measure progress of gender equality in education is by analysing the way that learning materials cover the issue. So our last full report looked at gender and curricular frameworks, and our latest paper looks at textbooks. We believe that textbooks are hugely influential. In some contexts, they are the first and sometimes the only books the young person may read. So our paper analysed secondary school textbooks from the 1950s until 2011. It's a vast analysis. And what we found is that it's very clear that many textbooks are substantially out of date. For instance, to give you a couple of the key findings, it showed that the percentage of textbooks that mention women's rights has more than doubled from the 1946 to 1969 period to the decade that we've just had. So that's good news. However, if you look at different regions, the story is a little different. In Northern Africa and Western Asia, for instance, only 1/6 of textbooks cover women's rights at all. And as is the main subject of the chat that's been going on this past week, gender bias in textbooks remains a significant problem. However measured, unfortunately, in the lines of texts, in illustrations, in the proportion of named characters and citations, girls and women are seriously underrepresented. If you look at many examples from Algeria, France, Italy, and Turkey, as we did in our paper, you can see that women are also often shown in submissive or traditional roles like cleaning and in serving men. It's not all bad news, though, which I think is quite important because we do like to all focus on the negative. If Vietnam, for instance, or Rwanda are both countries that could be looked at as positive examples where textbooks have been revised with gender equality in mind. There are also some signs of hope elsewhere where new revisions may take place soon. One of the 3 strategies in Pakistan's last education plan was to call for textbooks to be free of gender bias. So this is something we should follow up on, I think, and a nice advocacy focus. And many international agencies like the World Bank have now picked up on the issue as a key challenge that they want to tackle as well. Our paper has a few concrete recommendations for how we can look to eliminate gender bias in textbooks. We believe that it's not enough just to call for it, but the government should arrange for workshops with those who are writing textbooks and illustrating for textbooks, because they can come from private and multiple different places and people, but that all of these people should be trained in the concept of gender equality and what that might look like in print. And there are some simple things which writers and illustrators can look out for, which we've listed in the form of a checklist in our paper. And I heard from Senegal recently that it is something that they've done as well, as have a checklist that textbook writers can look at. So, for instance, women should not be shown doing work that's just an extension of their domestic and maternal activities, but also that textbooks should really expose the common forms of gender discrimination that are going on in that particular country. And simply maybe they should promote the rights of girls and women. And then practically, those who are reviewing textbooks should ensure that there's parity between men and women, girls and boys in the text, but also in the illustrations, in the hero characters and the well-known figures that textbooks are showing. The GEM report isn't going to stop its research here. The content of education is something that we're quite keen on keeping as a focus over the next 15 years, or 14 now, which is why our 2017 report, which is out this October, will be looking at the way gender sensitivity is covered in teacher training materials, which I was pleased to see quite a lot written about on the chat this past week. I do want to make a call out for anyone who's got data or research on that issue that they think we could use, to maybe contact me afterwards, or put a link up on YouTube. I think the last point I might make before finishing, however, is that as we said in our latest gender review, if we are going to reach gender equality in education, we have to think holistically. So textbooks are certainly part of the puzzle, but we can't just focus on books, and we can't just focus on gender parity of teachers or whatever we choose. We've got to look at what's happening outside of education as well, which is influencing what's happening inside the school walls. And by that, I mean what's happening in the home, what's happening in work, and what's happening in politics. I think that's it, but I'll pass over to the others on the call.
Great, thank you. That was a really great overview of your recent work, and definitely provided some great background information as we continue talking about this. So now I wanted to ask a question to our three other participants. If they could share some of their own work, and then also work that they know of or support, and different examples of policies, campaigns, and also initiatives that have proven successful in addressing these gender-based stereotypes in the classroom. So we're going to start with Leary from the Council of Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As I mentioned to you earlier on, we are an organization that works directly with the member states, like UNESCO or OECD for that matter. So our primary interlocutors are not directly the teachers in the classroom, but the governments. And during the last couple of years, we have focused a lot on challenging stereotypes, not only in the classroom, but also in the media. So we've had a couple of events specifically dedicated to these issues. And the conference that took place in Helsinki in 2014, I think, or 15, focused specifically on how we're doing at the level of the member states with regard to gender issues, and notably how do gender stereotypes affect the inequalities that are spread out there, not just in the classroom. The point of departure was the work undertaken at the level of the member states to implement the Committee of Ministers' recommendation on gender mainstreaming in education. It's a recommendation that dates from 2007, and the member states have undertaken an obligation to put in place measures to ensure gender mainstreaming in the education systems. And the results, unfortunately, were not very good. There is still a lot of difficulty in understanding the concept of gender mainstreaming, and there is also a great deal of difficulty with regard to how to go about it in practice. Gender mainstreaming is very important because it's also the point of departure for other, triggering other changes, including with regard to gender stereotypes. It was interesting in Helsinki because we did, while there have been difficulties to ensure full gender mainstreaming and to clean the classroom or the textbooks from gender stereotypes, and the results are not there yet, the good practices are there. Now, I think it will be very difficult for me to list them all because we have about 25 of them, which are published in this little book, which is available online as well, and which we will be happy to make available to you in hard copy if you so wish. You could contact me afterwards. But they vary. There is a lot of variety in the good practice that includes whether it is information campaigns, pairing up with companies, high-tech companies, and having sessions with both boys and girls to raise awareness about scientific or STEM subjects. And there it was very interesting to listen to participants because they said, why do we have to insist? It's part of that effort to achieve gender equality beyond the classroom, because if you choose a STEM subject, you also know that when you get out of life, these are also the jobs that are paid better than other jobs. So while trying to encourage girls to choose, they also try to raise awareness among boys for the types of jobs that are usually for girls, whether it is in the social sector or in the education sector. So awareness raising, pairing up with outside companies, but also a number of member states have put in place mechanisms or structures that carefully screen the textbooks before they are being published to make sure that they do not contain gender stereotypes. Other ideas included, I'm trying to see if there is one, yeah, that's the including computer science management for both boys and girls, providing brochures on gender-sensitive education, working and providing training as well to not just teachers at the education age, but pre-nursery and nursery school, because one of the conclusions that the conference reached was that gender stereotypes start very, very early, the moment that a child is brought into this world, whether it is about the choices of color or whether it is about the choice of toys. So Denmark had a very good example for nursery education, for example, on how they tackle gender stereotypes and try to have a gender-free or a gender-neutral education. So I think there is a lot of inspiration that we can take. And in the case of Denmark, for example, this example or this practice was already taken on board by some of the Baltic states, and they had translated the material, which is something that you can do. You can pick it up and just adapt it in the language of the country concerned. So there is a lot of good practice out there, despite the fact that there is still so much to be done. So I think I will strongly advise some of the participants in the conf call to make use of this one, and we will try to keep it up to date. We will revisit maybe in a couple of years and then ask member states to supply. It's very well structured because it says the good practice, the target group, the description of the good practice, and then you have links to each of them. Electronic links, which means that you can easily access this kind of information. We also hope to be able to develop some more work, because in addition to the current standards that we have developed at the Council of Europe, we have started work on drafting a Committee of Ministers recommendation on sexism. So we're not done yet with standards, so we hope we will bring some more tools and standards make them available to the member states so that they can continue to work on this in this area. So I do not want to go into the details, I said, and read those good practices, but I just wanted to flag out that they do exist, and that we will be happy to share them with you.
Great, thank you very much. That was a really comprehensive overview. I'm pretty sure that the link to that report is already available on the Wikigender page, so anyone who's interested can find it on the online discussion page at www.wikigender.org. If not, we'll make sure to add it after this webinar finishes. So now we're going to move to Nora.
Great, thanks very much. Well, I want to talk about two different approaches. I mentioned earlier that over the last few years, we have been running an experience called the Good Practice Fund, the documentation of good practice. So it's not about funding people to do things, but rather to document the good practice they are doing. And we were able to bring together the experience of 17 small organizations, some small, some a bit larger NGOs who are focusing specifically on girls' education and gender equality. A number of them sought to change the roles of the girls tend to play in the classroom or in the school. And one, for example, a small organization called the project was called My Rights, My Voice, put in place opportunities for girls to play a leadership role in school council, to speak to the school management committee, to speak to the actual community around the issues and challenges they faced. And that allowed for a shift in the dynamics in the classroom and in the school, shifting from the more traditional role of girls not in leadership positions to one which they were actually the majority of the leaders in the school council. Another approach, a number of organizations actually focused on leadership building for girls as a way of changing the dynamics in the classroom. I wanted to raise also another model, which is not one which was part of the Good Practice Fund, but actually a second launch of a project called the GEM, or the Girls Equity Movement in Schools, which is carried out by ICRW. And I don't think that's in the wiki page right now, but we probably should put it in there. It's a new evaluation of an initiative which was first launched in 2008 in Mumbai, and then more recently another project, another partnership picked it up between 2014 and 16. And what they did was focus on working with girls and boys, so together, both mixed girls and boys, to focus on what is gender equality in education, what is their experience in the classroom and in their lives, and to change perceptions and attitudes. They also worked with teachers to do the same thing, to allow teachers to reflect on their own experience of disparity and inequality, and to change their understanding of what that might look like in the classroom. And the result was really quite remarkable. So changes in attitudes, such as men should be the only ones who be working outside, and what are the others? Some boys should not sweep and cook at home. Boys are violent by nature. Those kind of values or attitudes saw a huge change through the project and at the end of this 2-year project. So I think that there are a number of ways to get at this, and a huge range, and we heard some of them earlier, and I know that Hendrina will share others with us. But I think actually the focus specifically on what teachers and students feel themselves about inequality, and allow them to reflect on that and question the gender norms with which they face every day, and see what can change in order to make a difference in the classroom. I think that's the most promising approach, although we don't have a lot of research findings, and that's one thing we'll turn to the next question, the challenge in actually documenting and reporting on this kind of good practice. I'll stop there and allow you to turn to Hendrina for her experience.
Can I just take a second?
Sure. We'll be coming back to you after, if that's okay. We'll let Hendrina explain some of her work.
Can I take a second?
Holding on?
No. It was just a national title. I am one of the French leadership is from Poland. I'm the boss project.
Great, thank you. Hendrina, do you want to share some of your work with us?
Yes, please. I want to start by saying I think as far away we've been working on what we call as an holistic approach in terms of trying to demystify the stereotype within the classroom. We've done quite a lot of work around working with the students themselves, trying to empower them and trying to give them a different face from what they see in the community by empowering them and ensuring that they appreciate who they are, but also bringing the boys on board. So we've done quite a lot of work around youth empowerment, which we call Tuseme, allowing the girls to speak out about issues that affect them. And we found out that through that process, we were able to identify some of the stereotypes which were actually hidden within the curriculum, and they were able to unpack and use that to create an enabling environment within their communities and also within their schools. The other approach that we looked at is we do recognize that learning is not just about the students, but we also need to explore the environment in which the learning is taking place. So then we had also to interrogate the physical facilities within the learning institution, where the actual learning is taking place, and try to identify some of the areas which were actually stereotyping in terms of the facilities, in terms of limited sanitary facilities, or sometimes it could also be in terms of just the way the timetabling is done in the school, to create an opportunity at which the girls would have ample time, if they are going through their menses, to do to change and do all sorts of things. And we found out that that has helped quite a lot. And then we also looked at the teachers themselves. One thing we realized, even as we were engaging in this process, is the fact that changing the curriculum was such a big issue. And then we looked at how best can we approach, because it takes such a long time, at least in Africa, for the curriculum to be changed. And yet there are so many students that are actually going through the hands of the said curriculum, which is stereotyped or gender biased. So we decided then to look at empowering the teachers and making sure that the teachers are empowered with skills to be able to transform the gender stereotype materials that they are using into materials that could be gender sensitive, but also that could take cognizance that they are actually boys and girls in the learning space that they are facilitating. And I think the gender responsive pedagogy has actually been very popular. As we are speaking now, I want to say, and I think I put that on the discussion this week, we did try that in 5 countries, which is Kenya, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and I've missed out one. But anyway, with those countries, we tried to help the teachers to be able to have the right skills to be able to teach the subject in a way that they are sensitive to the needs of boys and girls. And the reason we did that is we realized that most of the teaching is being done informed by the actual experience that the teachers bring from the communities. And these are communities that do a lot of stereotyping. And so for us, we felt it is important that we empower the teachers and make sure that they take cognizance that if girls are given the opportunity to learn, they can actually perform as well as boys. But for them to do that, the teachers then need to take initiative and transform the stereotype materials, transform the stereotype learning environment, and just make it conducive for learning. And we've seen that this has been well received. As we are speaking now, Ethiopia is one country where we thought this would not be integrated, but they've gone far ahead the other countries in the sense that they've been able to adapt our training material, and now it's a policy that any secondary school teacher who graduates before they are posted to a secondary school, they have to go through that training of gender responsive pedagogy, which is to us is a great success. We also did similar work in Malawi in teacher training colleges. I wanted to start by saying that, as far away we know, we are an NGO, so we can only demonstrate what works. And I think that has helped us a lot in terms of helping to integrate gender in teacher training curricula. In Malawi, what happened was we worked with one teacher training college in introducing gender responsive pedagogy, and in 3 years' time, we've been able to replicate in all teacher training colleges with support from GIZ and the Ministry of Education in Malawi. And as we are speaking now, Zimbabwe is also exploring those possibilities. So for us, building the capacity of teachers to be able to transform the stereotype learning material has been a key component of addressing the issues of stereotype. And then the other aspect that we're looking at is around, and I know some of my colleagues have mentioned this, is around creating that awareness among the communities. We did realize that stereotype, like we saw from the discussion this week, that it's also about what goes on in the homes, what goes on in the community, and that is brought to the classroom. So we also did quite a lot around the campaign, creating awareness on the importance of having a gender-free environment, or an environment where both girls and boys are given the opportunity to express, to learn, and to do things according to their capabilities. And we felt that has helped. So taking that holistic approach and putting it in a learning environment, we found out that if you deal with the teachers, if you deal with the students, if you deal with the school management, if you look at the school infrastructure, and you also get awareness among the communities around that school, it helps quite a lot in demystifying the stereotype. But some of the challenges that we've faced as an organization over the 25 years, by the way, that we've been working, is that sometimes sustaining these practices can be challenging. We do recognize that 10 years into our establishment, we were able, for instance, to develop checklists for book development and what needs to be removed, and a number of countries committed and started doing that. But because the focus shifted, we have seen that we've actually gone back 15 years backwards. We still, at this point, we still find teaching and learning materials which are gender stereotype and so on. So I think one of the issues that we need to be looking at is how do we sustain this to make sure that we move forward and not 3 steps forward and 10 steps backward. I think that is one of the challenges that we are experiencing. The other aspect is also about commitment by government. And I think one of the things we've appreciated is that when the government sees that this is a very innovative intervention, they are very good at saying, yes, we are going to take it up. But sustaining that and translating that, if it's a policy, into action has been a challenge, especially if the monitoring is not well done. So those are some of the areas I think that we need to be looking at, even as we explore on how we deal with the stereotyping. I think it's an aspect of saying, yes, we bring the issue on board, we propose intervention, but how do we sustain those interventions so that they are able to produce the desired results that we need to produce. We in Africa are concerned that even as we are speaking now, there are so many, despite all this that we have done, there are so many children that are dropping out of school. And some of the reasons of dropping out of school are linked to either gender stereotype or the kind of learning environment that the children are exposed to. So I think those are some of the issues that we really need to look at and see the best way forward if indeed we want to achieve the SDG 4 as it is stated now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. You kind of made a nice segue into our next section that we're going to talk about. I wanted to just quickly, though, mention 2 comments that are taking place. One from, and that connect very well to what you just shared with us, Hendrina. So the first is actually someone who's watching the webinar. Tom Vanden Bosch agreed that textbooks do not change overnight. And we also need to work to empower teachers to deal with the existing bias in the textbooks. So obviously that's a point that other people are also reflecting on and thinking about how can we address that issue. And then also a few of you have mentioned the idea of a holistic approach and how it's not just in schools that where we're going to be solving these problems, these gender inequalities. And Rosanda Quartar shared in the online discussion example from Suriname, where the government has introduced gender equality friendly story cards into the classroom. So for example, that show the mom washing the car and the dad cooking. However, apparently there's been some backlash from parents who don't always agree with that and don't believe that that's a correct teaching. So obviously I showed you that it's not just going to be the job of the teachers, unfortunately. We're also going to be needing to work with parents and the community as a whole. And then you also mentioned the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Framework. And this is a very ambitious agenda that was adopted in 2015 and is going to take some really important investments from the entire development community. And in particular to this discussion today, we have SDG 4, which aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So this is a big ambitious goal that we have been working towards in the past, but we're obviously going to need some sort of new impetus going forward if we really think that we're going to achieve this by 2030. So looking forward, I'd like if each of you could maybe share what you think is needed in terms of research, indicators and data, and also more investments, where the real impact is going to be made if we are going to continue to make progress and hopefully achieve SDG 4. So I'd like to start with Kate from UNESCO.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, you're right. It's a big agenda, and it contains words like gender equality and global citizenship and education for sustainable development. And these terms are complex and the definitions are contested, and how we monitor them is contested as well. Unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but the GEM report is mandated to sort of figure that out. And I think, as I mentioned right at the beginning, it's something we've been looking at. I don't think we've got an answer yet, but we're moving in the right direction. And by that, I mean that, you know, for so long we've been looking at parity as a way of looking at gender in education, you know, the number of boys to girls. And I think it's now safe to say that we've managed to move the discussion on to equality. You know, parity is maybe one bit of the equation. I think there are many indicators that you can choose from. Our report, and certainly our latest gender review that was out at the end of last year, looked at some potential indicators that you could choose to measure gender inequality in education. And maybe some of them are more obvious, such as the percentage of teachers who receive training in gender sensitivity, or the percentage of countries that include gender equality in their curricula, as we were discussing. But there are other more holistic measurements that are going to involve partnerships and are going to involve a bit more work. But these sort of address the root causes of gender inequality that are filtering through into education. And they include some that we've been talking about for a while, such as the number of child marriages, which obviously impacts on education. But also, if we think more broadly, maybe the percentage of women in leadership positions, because at the minute it's fairly shocking that fewer than 20% of heads of state are women, 18% of ministers are women. Another idea could be to look at the percentage of women among those studying STEM subjects. Liri, you were talking about that, and I saw you were commenting on it last week, because the stats show that women make up almost 70% of those who are choosing to major in education, but only 25% of those who are choosing engineering and manufacturing. Another indicator that might help give a broader picture of gender inequality and how that's filtering through into education is the ratio of women to men doing unpaid work, which is currently enormously unbalanced. I think there are double the amount of women doing unpaid work than men. I think in terms of investment, it's probably, there is obviously a financial element, but also time. And I think that's about reaching consensus between all of those who are working on this issue, bringing together people not only who work on education, but also those who are working on SDG 5, which is on gender equality, and those on education, so that we're sharing best practices, not duplicating work, and coming to consensus. You know, if you look at other areas such as school violence, you can see there's a whole range of different initiatives looking to measure it, but the fact that there's a lack of consensus or consistency means that we don't know what the global prevalence is. We should make sure we're at the beginning of looking at this issue of gender equality in education, as the SDG agenda calls for us to do, and we should make sure that we do it together. A concrete recommendation that we had in our latest report was that a working group could be set up. We suggested UN Women, who are also key for looking at SDG 5, UNGAI, Nora, and UIS. We have seen that it was successful for others who are looking at issues such as domestic violence and HIV, for which you can imagine there's a holistic approach to trying to fix those as well. And I think if they've had success, it's possible that we might too. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. No, definitely agree that interlinkages of the SDGs and how that's something great about them, but will make it difficult going forward, but also offers a lot of opportunities to address these issues from multiple entry points. So thank you very much. Liri, would you like to share some?
Yeah, Kate has perfectly set the ground, because we'll have to look at this in the bigger picture and context. And for us at the Council of Europe, this is very important, because when we talk about gender equality, we talk about equal participation, we talk about equal visibility, we talk about equal empowerment, we talk about equal responsibilities, and we also talk about equal pay. So when we take it in this larger context, then it's easier to follow up a little bit. While we're not a primary data collection organization, for the report, for example, on gender stereotypes in education, we had to look at the actually UNESCO one, the UNESCO Atlas, which provided us with some very useful insights into the subject choices of the young men and women, and we had to base it. We had to base our analysis and our choices of the themes to be discussed on the UNESCO Atlas. So, in that sense, we do not collect data per se, but we do have. And we will continue to work on indicators and benchmarks. And those indicators and benchmarks we can pick up from the different legally or non-legally binding instruments, because I spoke about the Committee of Ministers recommendation on gender mainstreaming in education, and there is regular monitoring, which means that member states provide us with information on whether there has been progress or not in terms of measures proposed by the recommendation. But we also have legally binding documents. I mentioned it in one of my comments on internet. And here I think it's very important to highlight the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, which is open for signature and ratification not only to European member states, but also beyond Europe. And in the Istanbul Convention, we have very specific provisions which are related to gender stereotypes and sexism as factors which underpin the equality between women and men in all domains, including in education. So this is something that we will be following very closely, and the signatory parties are monitored regularly, and they will have to give information what they're doing on this particular area, from which we can then also build on good practices, but also indicators and benchmarks. We have a number of other instruments in this particular area, but as I said, primary analytical data we do not gather, but we do gather data about policies and legislation that is put in place across the member states and across the different areas that we cover under our work in gender equality. And stereotypes is one, violence against women is another area, gender mainstream directives, access to justice is another one, and the fifth one, did I mention violence against women? I'm just trying to figure out violence against women, sexism, access to justice, gender mainstream. Of course, I forgot the most important one, balanced participation of women in public and political decision-making processes. Yet again, as I said, it's not data in terms of numbers probably related to education, but we are currently monitoring the implementation of this recommendation, which sets as a benchmark and which can be used as an indicator that the representation of either women or men should not go below 40%. And the initial bunch of data that we have received from the member states, and we've had a very good rate of response. We've had about 46 member states that replied to the questionnaire. Shows that we are far from achieving the SDGs and the Agenda 2030, 50-50 and so on, because it's well below, the participation of women is well below 40%. And yet again, in here, there is a lot linked to education. I mentioned when country member now who mentioned the good practice for leadership, one of the good practices is I'm the boss. For women to try to get them into interested in politics from a very young age. So there again, we will have quite a number of indicators which will show where do we stand in terms of women's participation in public and political life. So I think it's very important to take a dual approach. One, on the gender equality, SDG 5, the larger context, and break it down page 7. But as I said, for us, it will be mainly in those areas of work, violence, balanced participation, education, stereotypes, where we will continue to have information with regard to at least policies, legislation in these particular areas.
Great, thanks. Nora?
On to you, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to pick up on what Kate had mentioned about the importance of building consensus around a couple of different areas. I really wanted to recognize the important role that the Gender Review has played, the GEM team and the Gender Review in particular has played over the last couple of years in trying to identify what do we mean by gender equality in education and bring out some of the indicators which would help us to monitor how we're making progress towards that. This is still not agreed. We still don't say, okay, these are the key core components of what gender equality in education looks like. So it's particularly challenging for us to monitor if we don't agree on what that actually means. One area where I think Kate mentioned violence. I think gender-based violence in and around school remains an area where we really haven't come to terms with how to monitor. We don't know very much about the global prevalence of gender-based violence in and around schools, and we don't really agree on what are the core components, what we really need to do to combat gender violence in and around schools. And when we're not even in agreement about whether gender-based violence is actually a common feature in school violence, although some of us would contest that that's true, that all violence is based on inequality and social norms, which force power dynamic, which are the basis for power dynamics, and gender is a key component of that. I'm right now in Korea, where I had been attending the symposium on school-based violence, school violence, and there's a fair bit of debate still over whether gender is a factor of consideration or not. So, and the consensus around that and how we are going to monitor change will be necessary in order for us to actually make any progress in understanding what it is and making a difference. I think there's a lot of work still to be done in terms of understanding what goes on in the classroom, understanding how teaching and learning environment builds gender equality or fails to do so. And the role of self-esteem. We recognize that when girls are confident in themselves, they're better learners, and that the gender inequality in the classroom tends to undermine girls' self-esteem. But the link between self-esteem and learning still requires a fair bit of work to understand exactly what are the best ways to build up girls' esteem and confidence in herself as a learner, and then how to monitor the ingredients to the various elements which help us to achieve that. I think that all of these, there's a lot of work around defining the indicators and then putting in place mechanisms to collect the data. It's not something that standard by standard schools collect through their EMIS data, their administrative data. Sometimes household surveys pick up these additional areas of interest and concern, but it's not a standard approach. So collecting the data which help us to demonstrate that what is happening in the classroom, how various interventions are making a difference in terms of gender norms, changing the dynamics, the gender relations in the classroom, and achieving various outcomes or making progress in terms of change. We're just not really well equipped to do that as yet. However, there's a lot of work going on, and I think that the GEM report and the gender review continues to play a really important role in helping the global community to focus on what are the gaps in our knowledge and actually to help us to monitor change. Really appreciate the leadership that the GEM team continues to play there. I think I'll stop there and allow Hendrina to share her experience.
Yes, thank you. And I think I would like to start from the aspect that in Africa, gender equality has some cultural background to it. And if we link that to the way data is collected, we really need to interrogate on who has the capacity to collect data on gender equality. Our experience or our observations so far has seen that much of this data, first of all, that is being collected by men. And if we are looking for gender equality indicators, then to make sure that we capture the right data, how much are we doing to build the capacity of these people to actually bring out what is on the ground? So I think moving forward, one of the things we should be looking at is how are we investing in building the capacity of collecting the correct data that is reflective of what is going on the ground. Bearing in mind that we are dealing with an issue which has a cultural connotation, which has a social connotation, and that does not draw away the people who are actually collecting the data. So how authentic is that data that we are using to analyze the gender equality? For me, I think that's one area that we really need to look at and investigate. The other area also is about systematic way of collecting this data. Sometimes we get blinded by the fact that data that is collected gives a broader picture of a continent or of a country. But when we do a deeper analysis and look at what is happening in rural areas, in marginalized communities, and so on, how much of that data is actually being brought to the front so that it helps us to analyze and plan accordingly. So in a nutshell, I think building that capacity to be able to collect data that will be of value in measuring gender equality. I know also that for us here, we've seen a number of governments that are not even able to do the simple thing of having a gender disaggregated data. So what more then, if we are thinking of gender equality, how many of the governments will be committed to collect that detailed data to be able to analyze? So I think it's something that that we need to look at. And somebody mentioned the aspect of parity and equality. Again, I think in most of the African countries, that has also implications in the kind of data that is collected. It's very easy to compare boys and girls and so on, and without going beyond that to try and interrogate the data that is required to give us the impressions that we need in terms of gender equality. So I think we have a big challenge there in how do we build that capacity, and then how do we use the information that is brought up to actually help or inform the kind of work that that we are supposed to do, particularly in Africa, where gender equality is really linked to social and cultural practice. I think it's the biggest challenge that we are facing, and we hope that we'll be able to find solutions to some of those issues. And then the other thing also is one of the challenges that we face as we engage in advocacy is also whose data is authentic. As we deal with the comparisons and seeing different sources of data, and we engage policymakers to say, this is what it is telling us, we often get challenged to say, what you are giving us is outdated, or this is 10 years down the line, we've moved on. And so if you are thinking of engaging in policy work and ensuring that it's actually speaking to the SDG indicators and so on, we also need to harmonize on the cycle on how often we collect data and which of this data would be actually be considered, so that when we engage with policymakers, they accept and appreciate that, yes, we are dealing with data that they also own. I think ownership of the data that is being used to also analyze is another area that we need to harmonize and see how we could work on that. Because just the fact that the policymakers don't accept, you kind of change the direction of the conversation to start looking at whose data is right and so on. And that's a lot of time and resources wasted. So I think we need to look at how we can harmonize that and ensure that the data that is being used does not distract us from actually discussing the issues that are pertinent to gender equality. Then in a classroom setup and the experience again that we've had, not so much has been done, like Nora said. I think we need to do a little more research in interrogating what is going on in the classroom and how that links up to gender equality or in the classroom as well as within the school. I would end there. Thank you.
Great, thank you all very much. I'm sure we all agree that this topic could use much more time for reflection and debate. However, we're coming to the end of our time today for today's webinar. I want to thank each of our participants for taking the time to share with us about their work, and also invite everyone who's watching to continue the conversation on Wikigender. So we are having the online discussion. We're going to keep it open throughout the weekend. So if you have anything that you would like to add, you can join the discussion at www.wikigender.org. And also just to let you know that this is just the start of the conversation. So we're going to be doing hopefully more of these on specific topics focused on gender equality in education. So look for that in the coming months on Wikigender. So thank you all again and have a great day.